Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca. I'm a fish biologist and ichthyologist and also a PhD student specialising and studying lower cards catfishes. So today I'm going to talk about water clarity, and water clarity being kind of the ideal for many fish keepers, where they want crystal clear water. They want to be able to see as far as they want, as far as they can through the tank, see everything in sort of HD, high definition. So there's so many different solutions provided for, and it really depends on what's actually causing the issue. So the key term really here would be turbidity. Turbidity kind of refers to the clarity of the water, or how far you could see through it if it was a sort of a river, a lake, somewhere with a lot more water body. Although in aquariums, if it's sufficiently large, or of course sufficient, something that's really sufficiently reducing that clarity, that visibility, then it can occur. So sometimes with tannins. So when we're thinking about sort of habitats and this sort of clarity, stuff like the Rio Negro, that's a black water river that has a very high turbidity. You can't actually see that far through. It's a very low visibility, just because of the tannins and stuff like that. Whereas you got the Rio Orinoco, the Rio Xingu in Brazil, Rio Xingu's in Brazil, Rio Orinoco's more Colombia, I guess, and maybe Venezuela. But they have a much higher clarity. Maybe the only thing really reducing it is that sediment load, and that's why it's more of a clear water, a white water. And you've got variability depending where you are, like Lake Tanganyika and Lake Malawi seems very clear, but it might depend where you are in that actual lake. But maybe the real focus of this video is really going to be discussing how to sort out low visibility or high turbidity. Just why is your water cloudy, really? So one of the major reasons that's quite easy to solve is if you've got black water, if you've got tannins in the water. So if your tank is looking a bit tea stained, a bit more brown, a bit more sort of orangey in tone, and it's just the water itself and you can't see any more sort of particulates in the water, then that's probably caused by tannins, the black water. That's quite easy to solve. Firstly, it's worth working out the source. It's probably going to be some wood that you've put in, some botanicals. Some are worse than others, and it does depend on the situation. The lower the pH, the lower the hardness, I guess, tends to buffer it a bit more. Peat also will do it. Certain soils, it depends on what's in that soil. So, because soil is such a vast thing. But generally it's quite easy to solve. So if you've got black water or tannins that are causing issue of clarity and you don't particularly like it, then I would use something like activated carbon, Purigen. Activated carbon is really easy to use. If you're worried about using the granules and concerned about horn head disease, then you can buy massive sheets of the stuff. Purigen, any sort of, there's quite a lot of those sort of filters that remove organic particulates. Tannins, yes, they're good for some fishes. No, they're not good. Yeah, and yes, they're not good for all. So if you've got stuff like discus, it depends on the discus. Some discus will start peppering in those darker conditions. Tannins also are can be anti-nutrient, so they might, for some fishes, it might not help with what they're feeding on. And I guess that's more like the oral, if they're consuming it orally. There's a little bit more of a debate on how the benefit of tannins in the aquarium, because there's not much studies on it. But it's quite easy to solve, and you could also get like polyfilter. Polyfilter's a lot more expensive. I tend to reserve it for if there's any toxins that might have been around the aquarium. So activated carbon, Purigen, or maybe a polyfilter or some sort of resin sort of filter that you could put in a filter bag, or even old tights. If you've got tights available, you could put them in, and ideally in the filter itself, but it doesn't have to be. It depends on the situation. I put it directly in the tank, and I think it's because it does create some sort of gradient that might almost suck in the And also if you've got enough flow in the tank, that's going to be moving those tannins around, hopefully to, I think, to be, I guess it's adsorbed by the carbon. So the next reason that you might not have the best clarity would be algae, and this maybe isn't the commonest one or the most common in the aquarium, because we don't have that much high light levels. And I don't think it's simply these sort of LEDs or fluorescent lights that are particularly the problem. I think it's more natural sunlight. Both of these, there's a window there and there's a window there by each fish tank. They get direct light. I've always had aquariums that have had direct light, and I've never had green water. But so you'll know if you have this because the water will have that green tint, and it's not the most appealing, and it is probably one of the most beneficial in a way. It does create potentially some oxygen issues, and that's more so in the pond, but also it's kind of, it does improve coloration in fishes like goldfish and stuff, anything that really wants that red enhancing pigmentation, so maybe platies. I can't imagine it on fishes that aren't going to be feeding in the water column a little bit. But that green water is not so much of an aquarium issue. I don't know how some people get it though. But yeah, you're unlikely to have it from any LEDs. Even how long LEDs or lights are on. I've left aquarium lights on 12 hours or more and never had issues with green water, even with goldfish. The other factor here that I think is the biggest contributor to if you're going to get green water, and that's going to be nutrients. Some kind of nutrients, whether it's phosphorus, seems to be a particular one, whereas diatoms, that lot seem to prefer silicates. And the other one I think is sugars. If you got a particular like botanicals, anything that's introducing, or even wood, some sort of sugars, and we can't test for them. We don't really look at them too much, and I think that's more of a bacterial issue than it is for algae. But what can you do about green water? So the sort of quickest solution, or maybe the most drastic, would be going for a UVC filter. These do require almost hooking up to an external. They would go after, so once the water's gone through the external, it would then go through a UVC filter. These do use bulbs. I think now most of the ones on the aquarium trade, you can replace the bulb. So originally you couldn't, and you had to buy a whole new unit. They do tend to last around 6 months to a year, depending how long they're on for. Generally you only switch them on during the day, and in a pond you wouldn't switch them on in winter. Not that the algae goes anywhere at night, so I don't know entirely why. But yeah, so in a pond you wouldn't use it in winter, so it tends to not be switched on anyway. But in the aquarium it would be probably, and it depends on the bulb how long it's going to last. But that's kind of the quickest solution. The main thing is also to work out that source of nutrients that could be causing other issues, such as with the bacteria. And other than that, there are some flocculants you could use. I have no idea whether cloverleaf, whether it would work in the aquarium. I know it won't go below, I think it's 10 degrees, which most aquariums are above 10 degrees anyway. But there will be other flocculants that will control that algae. I wouldn't buy any algae treatments themselves that kill algae, because that's not really solving any of it. Flocculants at least will sort of make sure the algae lumps together and goes into the filter where it's caught and taken out. It will also remove any suspended solids, I guess, if it is a flocculant. There are other flocculants on the market. I think Dr. Tim sells a flocculant, and also maybe Microbe Lift and a few others. So then kind of very closely tied to this would be bacterial blooms. So unlike the algal bloom that will be more green, a bacterial bloom will have a sort of a white sheen, and there's always going to be bacteria in the water column. They're not going to be nitrifying bacteria particularly, but there will be a mixture of different, I guess, heterotrophic bacteria, maybe a few photosynthetic, but a whole different host of them. But when you get a bloom, that hints that there's something, some nutrient is particularly high. And I think the big one for bacteria is sugars. So botanicals, overfeeding, any sort of, not just nutrients I guess, but botanicals, certain botanicals. I found palm leaves really bad for that. And also fresh woods, any wood that's got still any of the xylem, I guess, and the xylem and the phloem sort of intact is going to have a lot of nutrients there. But it's worth testing and crossing out firstly phosphates, also worth crossing out nitrates, even to an extent I guess nitrites, just in case. You probably see it in your fish here. They would probably start dropping off if that was particularly high. And then other than that, obviously silicates, anything magnesium, just see whether there's something out of balance. A lot of it you can't test for though, which is particularly annoying. But it's worth keeping an eye on anything that could be sort of swinging. It's also worth looking at oxygen saturation, even with algal blooms, anything like that, whether there's something going to drop that oxygen saturation. But oxygen saturation isn't the easiest to test for anyway. But yeah, bacterial blooms seem to be a lot more common, and you might even see them on the glass. So the major reason I think it appears, so it's not about water clarity, that's more about glass clarity, and you can see this is not bacterial bloom, this is water stains. This is because I don't clean water stains off the tank, so they look a bit smeary. And then some of these are like frozen food where it's dropped on the tank. But that's why, but you will see this sort of film on the aquarium, and I think the marine hobby has something to say about this almost, because when I did marine, a lot of people would say, I still technically do, but people would say don't clean the glass at first, let it sort of develop. And I think that's a major reason why a lot of people have glass that gets algae, gets that bacterial film that's particularly thick or nasty, gets any sort of organisms on it, and it's because they keep cleaning that glass, which removes the whole layer of small sort of microbial films, and then it just leaves the sort of niche open for anything else to colonize, and therefore you get diatoms, you get filter feeders, and you will get a few. I've got a few I can see there. They tend to be at the bottom, and I think that sort of shows sort of the pattern of flow. That's where you get a lot more different sort of things going rather than a clearer. So I think leave the glass for once and see how it goes. I have found a benefit actually in even letting it grow, those diatoms, let it grow, and even if it looks nasty, leave it for a little bit and then clean it and then leave it. Because I've had it before where the diatoms have actually stained on, and then once I moved it, it kind of grew back a little bit, and the biofilms and that lot grew back. That's because you're going to have that bacterial film actually on the glass itself. So a lot about bacteria is being patient. A lot of aquariums, they're not going to be stable even for 6 months, a year. It takes a long time because there's that sort of flow of different organisms, a succession of different organisms. So detritus is probably the last thing that's gonna, well, I say it's the last thing I'm gonna mention. It's not the last thing you're gonna have to deal with having very clear, high water clarity. And the solutions to detritus is quite similar or the same as dealing with bacteria, which is why I haven't discussed how to solve bacteria. So detritus or sediment load is very common in a lot of aquariums, and I think partially this is caused by people not having powerful enough filters, not having enough flow in the tank, and not having anything particularly good with mechanical filtration to trap that waste. So you'll see it sort of in the sediment load where in the water column where you can see those sort of fine sort of whitish granules, and they might be brown, they might settle, a lot of them will start to settle in portions of the aquarium, and a few are okay, but then they're going to start, once they're setting, trapping waste, building up bacteria that's going to decompose and take up oxygen. If it's not, it's going anaerobic and it's releasing gases. It's not, the fish aren't going to use those bacteria most likely. I've never seen them actually eat it. And this is what kind of similar to why you're getting a lot of bacteria also, not just on wood, but also in the water itself. So that, I think that's the major reason. So it's also nutrients in a way, because there has to be that source, so it can be too much feeding. But most tanks are supplied awfully underpowered with filters. Some fishes do really well with that. There's not many, but some do need that lower power filtration. So in that situation, it's kind of that compromise, but making sure there is enough sort of flow in the aquarium, because you're going to get dead spots of oxygen as well, where there's not that flow to move the oxygen around the tank. So how to solve detritus and bacteria within the aquarium? So other than dealing with the nutrients for the bacteria, you want to really look at your maintenance. So are you cleaning your filters enough? When you clean them, how dirty are they? Are they a thick sediment load of waste? Therefore, that's also hindering the nitrifying capability of the bacteria in the filter. But it's also not helping it remove that much waste once it's that level. It's going to reduce the flow rate. It's going to be decomposing, therefore taking up oxygen. It's just not any use, really. It's just soil, really. And then, so that would be your filter. Water changes, you might need to siphon the tank. Not all tanks need siphoning, depends on the flow. For many fishes, power heads are a good idea for getting that flow around the tank. So even discus, they do inhabit a good current. Most fishes do. But making sure that's maintained as well and kept clear of detritus. When it comes to maintenance and water changes as well, it depends on the individual tank. What I do is when I first get a filter, I check it weekly, and if it's not if it's not clogged at that week, I'll leave it 2 weeks, and then if it's not clogged at 2 weeks, I'll leave it like 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And it can change over time. Your filter might have not needed cleaning for, say, a month, and then suddenly it needs it 2 months, or maybe it needs it every week. It does depend. And water changes need to be regular anyway. They should be at least 25% every week. And a lot more on other fishes and other tanks. These are 2 times 50% weekly, every 2 times 50% twice a week. So, and that might be part of it. I think there's this encouragement not to water change and not to filter clean, and therefore you get these tanks that don't have the best clarity. They're getting a lot of sediment build-up. The fishes aren't using it. My little cards will not touch that stuff. I've never seen them go for it. I have seen snails go for it though, and I don't think it does. Also, that detritus levels, it just does encourage pest snails, because that's a breeding ground almost for them. And the main thing about dealing with sediment load, and also will help with bacteria, is that mechanical filtration. And whether you do want to use very dense sponges Filter floss is brilliant. You could buy massive pond sheets, that saves a lot of money. Alternatively, if you want to be a little bit flash and have the money, then go for filter rollers, and they're available mostly from the marine side. They do need something to power them, so they're kind of more of a sump job, I guess, anyway. But definitely look into some sort of mechanical filtration. I have it in the externals. The internals are more for polishing water and getting some flow. So I definitely recommend looking at mechanical filtration. Is the detritus particularly harmful? Will I find the biggest issue with detritus is the oxygen levels and the flow. You can see it in the fishes where they're kind of a bit more raspy. But filter floss, you could just buy a massive sheet, shove it in any filter. None of my filters are designed for the filter floss I use. I just cut it to shape and put it in, and the filters just get cleaned a lot. But these are due, yeah, these are due anyway on Wednesday, so that's going to be a fun job. But hopefully this adds some sort of clarity. And I don't use, obviously this tank does not have plants. It does have, that is a Monstera Adansonii laniata. That kind of, it's from a plant over there, and I kind of just draped it in, and then it properly fell in. That's a Monstera deliciosa aerial root. It's the only one that's wanted to go in the tank. But you can see that I have basically no plants, and the water clarity is really good. You could go with plastic plants. It would trap quite a bit of waste, but you could just rinse them. They're kind of a good filter in a way. But you don't need plants to have a nice looking tank, and hopefully this kind of adds some clarity for those looking for that, the sort of clearer tank without having to. And planted tanks do make it more difficult because those roots, those leaves, everything is going to be trapping more waste. So anyway, thank you for watching. If you like my videos, please comment, like and subscribe, and thank you.